Hello, everyone. I'm Chandler. This is Old Ladies Lift podcast. I am flying solo today for the first time because my partner in crime, Larnie Mulvey, is unavailable. But I am joined today by who has become a good friend, Karina Barovic, also my NKT therapist. And we're going to talk about something very important today that I think all older female lifters should consider, especially if they have had a hysterectomy or C-section, which, given the stats, most of us have had at least one of those two things. So, NKT, or neurokinetic therapy, is a form of physical testing and rehab that's based upon principles of compensation. Specifically, it looks at body-wide muscle patterns of activity and inactivity relative to injury, as opposed to only those directly affected by injury. I stumbled upon NKT several years ago via Instagram, of all places. The founder of NKT, David Weinstock, has a great Instagram group called NKT, or Neurokinetic Therapy. And he posts all sorts of case stories and images and discussions about what happens when a particular muscle is not working, or something is crooked, or something compensates. And every time he posted something, relative to the jaw, hips, and feet, I would look at it like, that's me, that's me, that's me. Now, what do I do about it? So eventually, I got around to tracking down a practitioner in my area who is Karina, and began seeing her. And I've been seeing her for about probably a year now or so. Karina has her own practice, and it's called Sphere Therapeutix. She's been in bodywork yoga therapy for over 25 years. And the Sphere Therapeutix is a method that she developed herself, but she's also a level 3, the highest level of neurokinetic therapy practitioner. Does Reiki, as published author, and she happens to be older, female, and lift. So she fits right in our demographic, and I'm happy to have her here. So, Karina, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm good. And you did a good job.
My first solo flight. I get tongue-tied, I get a little nervous. So we're going to talk about NKT, and I gave my definition of it. Was I close? Did I approximate what it is actually?
You did good because it's, basically neurophysiology. So describing it to the layperson is not easy. It took me a long time to actually narrow it down and be able to describe it, because one of my clients had me come up with something for a doctor that does like PRP shots and stem cell therapy.
Oh, okay.
I had to come up with it to narrow it down. And what I came up with, to make it really short and simple, is we're basically balancing structures of compensation.
Oh, that makes sense. And I think compensation is key. And I want to say that over and over again, because our bodies adapt to whatever we throw at them. And sometimes they adapt well, and you have new motor patterns that work beautifully. And other times they still adapt well because they're keeping you moving, but it compromises other systems and creates problems. And I find that myself personally, and you've dealt with me now for a year, that I have layer upon layer of compensation because of certain things. And I'm crooked and I twist, and some patterns work and some patterns just don't fire at all. And that's an odd concept to have things not fire. And a lot of practitioners don't believe that that's the case. Unless you have, a complete ablation of a nerve, then that is going to cause a motor system not to fire. But that's not how the body works. The body compensates. And so it'll overact in one place and underact in another place.
Good job. Yes.
I've learned. You've taught me well.
Well, and that's the main thing, is that, we have surgeries, we have injuries, and we don't really realize that we compensate because the body is just so amazing because it still works. it's when we have pain, or we have, say, a hip that's worn after 40 years of having, after a C-section, you know, low back or lumbars that have jammed up, and maybe you need a surgery because you've worn all those discs and compressed nerves from years of, again, maybe a hysterectomy scar or another abdominal surgery we didn't even know that had created dysfunction in the first place. So
But we
that's
should
when
have
it,
suspected it, really. We really should have suspected that
yeah.
surgeries, abdominal surgeries in particular, would impact the entire body. Because that's where your center of gravity, center of muscles, musculature reside, is in that core stability. And when that stability is impacted, you're likely to shift in some way or another to compensate.
And our biggest compensations usually for mostly hysterectomy or C-sections because of where they're at. And we can talk about that later, but are like jaw, diaphragm, or pelvic floor,
Oh,
general
yes. Which,
overcom.
I've had a lot of problems. And surprisingly, the jaw, and this is jumping ahead a little bit, but the jaw is connected to your hips, which is connected to your feet. And who knew, that was the pattern? And maybe we should have, but that was actually the stuff that struck me on the Instagram account, was it when he would have images of the crooked jaw and the compensation in the crooked feet. I mean, in the crooked hips, and then down into the feet. And I'm like, yes, absolutely. That is me. That is everything that happens in my body. Now, the question had always been, how the heck do you fix it? And the jaw therapies that you do are painful. But we'll talk about them more, but they do seem to align my body a little bit more each time we do it. And we're trying to correct, 50 some odd, well, let's take hysterectomy. So 30 some odd, C-section, 30 some odd years, hysterectomy, 15 years of patterns that had come into play. And so it's a bit of a longer process. It's not a one and done, that's for darn sure. But
Unfortunately, but faster than some of the other therapies. That's why I got into this too.
so let's talk. Let's back up a little bit, because we're hitting some
Get
of the topics I
excited.
want to
It's
hit
exciting.
later. I'm so excited to have you because I have learned so much. So how did you get into NKT, and why did you get into NKT?
That's a good question. So yeah, I've been doing massage therapy for 27 years. And in my first year, I did have a back injury because I had great teachers, but we didn't learn body mechanics. So I had a little back injury there, and I, rehabbed it. And then years later, I was working at a spa on the Strip, and I did a lot of modalities, but one of them was ashiatsu with the feet. And it was one of my favorite modalities. And it would have been fine if I was just doing the broad pressure, but I was doing lots of repetitive motion with my feet, because we would hold on to bars and glide over people
Oh,
and do all
wow.
kinds of feet. So it was fun. But I had a pretty serious injury, basically tarsal tunnel, carpal tunnel of the feet, basically. And I had a back surgery. So I had 3 surgeries.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. So a lumbar surgery and then 2 ankle surgeries. And, then after that, I rehabbed nicely. But then after that, I tried so hard not to have a C-section, but, so is life. And
Yes.
so then I have basically scars on either end. So as well, a lumbar surgery can also affect your intrinsic core. So I have one on each side. And I knew that with the C-section. I'm like, I don't want a C-section. And it wasn't vain. It was for many reasons. But one of them was I have a scar on the other side of my intrinsic core now. But so is life. And so basically, when I would try to work out, I would get hurt, and it would be so frustrating. And so, blending all of my modalities, I still couldn't get to where I wanted to get. And I was seeing some of David's posts on Facebook, and, I was like, that would be interesting. So I took level 1, and, I study all the time, and it really kicked my butt, because as a massage therapist, I know where muscles are. I know every muscle, I know where they're at. But the movement of them and testing for movement, because that's really, it is movement patterns. We're not really testing just that muscle. It's a movement pattern that we're testing, but it kicked my butt. But I practice on every single client. And I went to level 2 and I went to level 3, and I'm like, I'm going to get good at this. And because I saw the changes, like I would do massage and it would help, but they still come back with, same problem. And it just didn't seem fast enough. So corrections can be faster with the neurokinetic therapy because you're repatterning their computer software program, their motor control center of the brain. If you haven't repatterned that injury, then the computer program is still the same.
Certainly, and you're going to keep doing the same thing over. As soon as it's going to flip back to its native or adaptive pattern. It's default as soon as you get going. And so let's talk about the problem with C-section and hysterectomy as it impacts motor control.
So, and this is one of the harder ones, although it can be helped, as you know, it can be helped, especially if we are aware of it. But the whole problem is where the surgery is done. So I'll show you a little anatomy. And the good news is I know that you guys have a good grasp of this. We're not just talking to somebody that doesn't know anything, because you guys are really aware of your bodies, people that left and athletes. That's what's cool, because you really have a connection to the body. So you feel these corrections when I make them. So I like that. Okay, so a little anatomy. Okay, so we have here basically the rectus abdominis, which is, right here in the middle, and that's more superficial. And we have external obliques, which are also more external on the outside. You start going inside, that's internal obliques. And then we have transverse abdominis, which is your deepest core muscle. We call it intrinsic core muscle. And it's like your belt. It's like when you wear a belt to lift, right? If that's not firing, then you're not stabilizing. And the reason why is because it's the only muscle that attaches to your lumbar spine via fascia. So via like a white material, connective tissue. But it's the only muscle that attaches to your lumbar spine. So if you don't have the TVA firing, then you don't have stability in the lumbar spine. So where they cut is right here, right? It's pretty, it's nice, but actually this one that they used to do up and down along the linea alba was way more functional. This one screws us up all day long, because that's your intrinsic core stability right there. It's that white tissue that comes down. That's what actually is going to fire up and then transfer load. And that's the same thing on the back too. There's also the white tissue that fires up to the glutes and the lats, but that's another podcast. But if this is cut through, you've just lost your intrinsic strength. And there's things that we can do for that, but the TVA is going to downfire. And then a lot of times the pelvic floor downfires as well on that. And then we have compensation. So the body's so smart, if this isn't firing, that TVA is not firing up to do what it needs. I think that basically, we have diaphragm that constricts, we have jaw that constricts, and those are main structures. There's a lot of other things. A lumbar spine, like I was saying, can compress to create that stability, or a hip will jam to create the stability. The body's smart, so it'll find something to create stability. The problem is if that's doing that for years, then we may have some wear and tear in those areas, because they've been compensating and they're really not supposed to work that way.
Well, exactly. And so I find myself 30 years post hysterectomy. Get those two confused, post C-section, because I had twins, which means my belly was huge to begin with so everything got smooshed around with two babies in there. And all of those compensations that you mentioned have occurred in my body. And so what do you do to start unpacking those compensations?
So we would balance out, and that's a lot of what we work with in NKT is we balance out the overworking and the underworking structures. So scars are seen as high priority, we call them. And high priority means that that's the structure that we need to work with, that's overworking. And then we would find, as a therapist, we would find structures that are underworking. A lot of times with the C-section, it's the entire intrinsic core. all day long, I see it. I mean, no fail, And So I'm testing all those structures in the movement pattern to see, are they firing? Are they inhibited, which means downfired? And then, normally I'm going to mobilize the scar. So scars are the highest priority.
So with the C-section and with what muscles aside from core muscles or core muscle patterns are typically inhibited?
So TVA is number one. And we
Yes,
need that,
certainly.
right? As we
Because we
discussed.
cut it up.
Yes. So TVA, your hip flexor, so your psoas, which are quite important, your obliques, and your QLs.
Exactly. All the ones that I have.
Yes, exactly. And we laugh
do
as we fire those QLs up and they don't fire, right? I'm with you.
So yeah, all the time. I mean, it's like Karina will do one of her tests to see if something's active, and she'll say contract this or contract that or move this or move that, and it's like, there's nothing there. It's like there's no signal, nothing. And so I've dealt with this for years while lifting, and no one believed me. I and my husband especially, because he's a guy, and he's never had things. He has recently had things cut up in his abdomen, but male coaches and male lifters, they'll say, well, that's not right. Everything's working, because I'll feel like a point. I'll be squatting down. There will be dead zones, where and it's I imagine it is like a computer searching till it finds something. But there are discrete dead zones in each of my lifts, depending on, what's working and what's not, where I feel as though there is nothing firing. And it's just kind of like a trust fall at that point until something else kicks in. And so we've been working to turn those on, and whether or not they will eventually turn on completely, I don't know, but I am a bit more stable these days. But I think that that's probably a common problem with women who have had C-sections who happen to also lift, to sense that there are sections of their body that do not fire appropriately. And the response they get, well, you're still lifting. If you're still lifting, something's got to be firing. Well, certainly something is firing, but not what it's supposed to, and not the safest way to compensate.
It doesn't feel balanced, probably.
It's certainly not balanced. It's certainly, and I remember when I was squatting heavy a while ago, like years ago, because all of my problems are almost always on the left side, all of my non-firing issues. My left hip, left leg, when I got heavy enough, would just collapse completely. And it could be real dangerous if I couldn't compensate and figure it out. But everyone was like, just force it out. It's like there was no conscious, or it happened automatically. Every time I would hit, a certain threshold of tolerance, it would just collapse. And I'd have to wait until there was some signal that I could bring it back. I couldn't maintain the signal all the way through the lift.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times too, we may not, like you said, you might feel those dead zones. We might also feel it like, man, my hip always hurts, or my lower back always hurts. Or what I noticed, one of the first things that I noticed, and I am a yoga instructor, and I do movement, and I was like, after my C-section, it was like, why am I breathing up here? Why can't I breathe from my belly? That was one of the first things I noticed. Yeah. So you might notice your neck getting really tight. But I realized that it totally reorganizes your breathing. And why is because transverse abdominis is not firing, right? Because it's an exhalation muscle. And QLs actually help to pull the rib cage down as well. So all you're getting is a rib cage coming up. And so your scalenes start to overwork. Then you can lock down your neck, have all kinds of problems in your hands.
And everything goes haywire. So let's talk about hysterectomy a little bit, which is surgically, in terms of scars, is typically a lot milder, but you're actually removing an organ that used to stabilize things. And now all of a sudden there's this empty space, and things have to compensate there as well.
Yes. And again, they used to do them differently. And then they made those pretty too, because I have a client I don't know how long ago she had it, but she had one of the first ones that were the ones like C-section lower. They're called like a Florida Smile or something like that. And
Someone was
it's
very sick naming
yeah,
that.
yeah,
It must have been a man. I mean,
yeah, of course it was. And so I think they're a little smaller than C-sections, but they're still in that same area of stability. And like you say, we're taking an organ out. So if we think about like a visceral, we all have kind of little sacs around and fascia that surrounds those organs as well. So like you say, there's like a dead space. So sometimes, there's adhesions that fill up. And I've seen a lot of times adhesions down to the bladder as well. So if you think about it, that scar tissue can go deeper than you see. And if the bladder's stuck down, that's going to affect things too, right? So
oh,
that internal fascia is what we don't think about a lot of
and
times.
so do you work on hysterectomy differently than you do C-section, or is it still the same?
It's about the same because with the C-section also it can have scar tissue very deep down too. Not always, but sometimes. But the body has to, when we have a C-section, they're taking organs out, right?
Well,
I hate to say it, but they do take organs out to get the baby out.
yeah, certainly. Or two
So
babies or three babies.
right. And then they put everything back in, and it might not be exactly in the right place. So
Not
there's a
where it
lot of
was.
disorganization and disruption going on. We don't see it because they have that, little
Yes, that's true. They have a little thing. So how do these surgeries in particular affect pelvic floor muscles and in particular, incontinence? Because a lot of female lifters have a problem with incontinence with heavy lifts, particularly deadlifts.
yeah, and
Uh,
it's so annoying.
I'm sure, yeah.
And
Knock on wood. I mean, I
they're
don't
not
want to jinx it. I
alone.
don't have that problem yet, but
Yeah, well, and it's good because these ladies are not alone. I mean, it's very common, even after people give, vaginal birth, it can be common too. And episiotomies, let's not forget
oh,
about.
yes.
That's not when I work because I'm not an internal pelvic floor therapist, but sometimes I will tell my clients what to do with that one, or go to a pelvic floor therapist. But anyways, back on subject. So the pelvic floor and the intrinsic core are very linked. So if diaphragm is an overworker or facilitator because all your intrinsic core is not firing right to stabilize, and then what happens is the diaphragm will get tight or constricted, which is the facilitation. And so it's a muscle, right? It won't drop down and contract and relax and go back up like it's supposed to. So the diaphragm gives cueing to the pelvic floor. So if the diaphragm, if we're not building that intra-abdominal pressure, which I know you guys know what that
Yes.
means,
Yes.
which I love, you can't build intra-abdominal pressure if your transverse abdominis isn't working and if the diaphragm is facilitated. So breathing, and you know me because I'm
Your
always saying,
breathing becomes really important, and that diaphragmatic, whatever injury, it's not really injury, just impaction, I guess, or something.
tightness.
Tightness is I think key here. You keep saying it over and over, and I know I have a problem, particularly on the left side. My diaphragm jams up under my ribs, and then my hip jams up, and the cycle begins. But I actually hadn't thought about it in terms of incontinence or pelvic floor, and I don't think many people would think about the problem is actually higher up than the pelvic floor muscles themselves, that
Exactly.
you've got something going on that is constricting the movement of the diaphragm and everything's pulling up, and then you're having a problem with incontinence.
Yeah, I mean, because your pelvic floor is basically a trampoline. So people
Yeah.
try to do all kinds of things. Kegels are good because they're an exercise, but it's not the end all be all. If you don't have your breathing correct, that trampoline is not going to buttress on that intra-abdominal pressure, because it's like when you take an inhale and the diaphragm drops down, this has to be able to be the trampoline to hold that pressure in. So if it's not firing right or it's inhibited and it's like, oh crap, what do I do? It's not holding that,
Yeah.
then you're not going to be able to build that intra-abdominal pressure correctly. And,
Interesting.
so basically it's like this pump, right? That does
Yeah.
that.
And so that would impact also not only, whether or not you can hold your pee on a deadlift,
Right.
but how you brace your back and whether or not you're likely to have, more lower back issues. Um,
Absolutely. And
so
what's
your
going to
back is
compensate?
not your back necessarily. It's not like
Exactly.
so I guess that's probably key to NKT, and that's one of the things that I really appreciate is that the site of the injury is not necessarily the site of the injury.
Where the pain is, it's not. That's what all of
Is
us.
not, yeah.
But you got to
And
work that, or the client's going to walk out and go, I don't know what she just did. So I always want the site of injury as well as what the balancing act
well,
is.
yeah, but you're not gonna fix it if you don't figure out where higher up in the chain the originating compensation is, or at least, or even the cascade of compensations that occur, because it's not typically just one thing, correct? It's usually
Yes.
15 that you've
Yeah.
got.
And so you kind of have to, basically I would start around that scar and start trying to get the intrinsic core firing period first. And then we kind of break down the little patterns and layers because there can be a lot. But like for me, I believe she started actually with my lumbar scar because it seemed to create a stronger lock and everything was down. My whole intrinsic core, my pelvic floor, everything was down. So she started with my lumbar scar first, and then we went to C-section. And because C-section is a large scar around that stability, right? That white tissue that transfers all that force and power. Sometimes we have to, the client has to go back to it. Like I try to rub mine before I get in the shower, and then I do my breathing exercise at the very least to turn everything on and optimize your body. So, I mean, it is what it is, but it's where it's at as far as on the body that sometimes we have to revisit. But once you have a practitioner that finds us and connects it, then that brain pattern starts to get it. I do find that sometimes stress in your life will sometimes kick a
Oh,
scar.
well, and it kicks everything into gear.
Yeah.
I mean, particularly if you have, either a severe stressor or just continuous stress, continuous mild stressors. I mean, it's a tax on the body. The body has to deal with it all the way down to the mitochondria, which is, the things that
Yeah.
I study. You have to be able to supply the body with the energy and the capacity to maintain in the face of all these stressors. And if there's any limitation in that, whether it be nutritionally, sleep, or you have injuries, then everything is just going to do what it needs to survive to get you through it. But those compensations, both in your body and in your metabolism, have to be unwound at some point. And if they're
Yeah.
not, then they're just going to pile on over and
Absolutely.
over. And you just become, yeah.
That's why I work a lot with nervous system and also with lymph because, and again, that's probably another podcast I won't go
That's a
into.
whole other podcast, but I think
Yeah.
the lip sync is really cool too. Can you, like, in 60 seconds or less? There's a lip guy on Instagram too. Surprisingly, I find a lot of interesting theories on Instagram and interesting practitioners, which I don't know that most conventional academics or other people would consider looking on social media for these types of things. But surprisingly, there's a lot of interesting information out there. Sure, there's a lot of weirdos, but there's some
Yeah.
good stuff.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely. Where and where this is located, basically, I'll get my paper out again. But basically, you have your largest lymph node up here, okay, and then you have inguinal lymph nodes. So where this is at, this, if we're talking about C-section or hysterectomy scar, that impedes a ton of lymph, and this is a highway, a lymph highway that goes across here as well. So they cut right through that lymph highway. So, I go to a lymph therapist strictly for abdominal to help move this lymph because I know my lymph blocks here. And so it backs up a lot of times up
yeah.
here. Lymph is a huge, now it's starting to be more popular, which is great, but it is a huge thing for overall because it's right with the blood system, right? Blood vessels and lymph
Yeah.
together. Lymph dumps into the heart to be filtered. So it's your immune system and your garbage system. So we are keeping, garbage, let's per se, keep it lay, but in our system, if we do have C-sections or hysterectomy scars that aren't being opened up, and us working our main lymph portals because of it's getting stuck.
It's getting stuck and you want things to move. I mean, that's with everything. I hate the phrase, but motion is
Motion is
lotion.
motion.
Yeah. But you want things to move. Movement is good. Stagnation on any level, whether it be muscular or biochemically, is bad. And that's another thing, again, that I hadn't considered. And when I first started seeing you, as you know, I was actually quite ill. In addition to all the physical things going on, I was having issues with blood pressure and all sorts of things. And you did a lymph, just a basic lymph massage all the way down, a couple of those sessions. And I think I mentioned that to you, that when you did those, not only did everything move and did the swelling went down and everything else, but my blood pressure would drop to a normal level and would hold for a couple days because of just moving the lymph along. And I had no anticipation that that was going to happen. That's not why we were there. We were there because I had a whole bunch of other physical effort. But that was a happy side effect of moving the lymph around. And so now I try to keep, myself moving it around and fluid from how you've taught me, which is quite simple. There's just certain lymph points that you basically massage and tap and let it go and things will move. And so, so that's another important thing, but it's again, particularly important if you had a C-section because stuff just gets clogged up down there. And then none of this is taught or even considered in traditional medicine or in, basic OBGYN stuff. In fact, you've told me stories of OBs or GYNs or whatever that don't agree with it at all, think that, oh, the scar is perfect and that's all that matters.
Perfectly.
Doesn't matter that there's no more organ, or it doesn't matter that it's a scar and that there are adhesions and those adhesions cause problems, but that the scar looks good.
Right. Oh, that must not have been my scar. I was like, but if doctors knew this when ladies came to them and they said, my hip really hurts, or, my low back hurts so badly, then because they don't know, it's not their area. Forgive them for that. But they would go, oh, I know who to refer you to, and that's where I think the alternative and, the conventional can meet. And I think that's where I got a lot of my clients was, she was a medical doctor, but she became a functional medicine practitioner. And probably I would have to say, I don't know if all of those people would have come to me if she wouldn't have told them, because she's a doctor.
Oh, well, certainly. I maybe not. And so, but it is important. And I think it's important that women, after they have a C-section and after they have a hysterectomy, they get some sort of rehab. We do absolutely nothing. And I've always considered that. So I was, because I had preeclampsia and was having twins and preterm labor and all of the other things that happen, I was on bed rest for 5 weeks before I had my C-section. Had my C-section in the hospital for 2 days, whatever it is, because they kick you out pretty soon. Thankfully, and I know this sounds bad, my kids were in the NICU, so I got a chance to recover a little bit. But basically, a week later, after being on bed rest, I was expected, like all new mothers, to move and take care of 2 new babies. Well, I have this major abdominal surgery and have no muscle tone. And so, and I think, wouldn't it be nice if, one, we treated women better and gave them time to recover, but two, help them to recover, to learn new body movements, to retrain things after you've had these major abdominal surgeries.
Holy cow. It's one of the most major surgeries that they don't even suggest rehab for. Just go take care of your baby. And
Yeah.
don't lift like for, for long as like, yeah, I have a baby,
What am I supposed? Well, I know. So that's with her. I always get a kick out of when a woman has a hernia surgery. They say she never ever can lift more than 5 pounds, but yet she has 3 kids. I'm like, where is that disconnect? Is like,
Yeah, I mean, it's really, it boggles my mind that they don't even suggest PT for C-sections. That is, and like I said, that's where your intrinsic core stability is. So women would fare so much better, because I get women years later, most of the time, unless they're my clients or friends of clients that know
yeah,
me, and they're like, oh, I got to get that scar worked. These patterns layer up over years because we don't know that we're supposed to have them.
exactly. So all women out there, and now I know most of our listeners are older and have had the C-sections and or the hysterectomies at this point. So yes, you can benefit from this, but your daughters can too. So if you
Absolutely.
have a daughter that is going to have a child or has had a child and had a C-section, I think it would be useful to consider finding an NKT practitioner that can help her rebuild those muscles going forward so that she doesn't have the years of compensation that lead to the twistiness and the injuries and everything else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if I can mention, I'm finally finishing my course. I have an online course that I do with my ball rolling. So I'm structurally aligning the body, but I also do movement, and it's going to be specifically restore your core and pelvic floor. So I'm
Oh,
finally
that's
putting
perfect.
that together.
Well,
Yeah.
let's we're about finished, so let's talk about a few of those things. How can people find you if they happen to
So
be in Las Vegas
yeah.
and or they are interested in the online courses? How can they find you?
So there's a couple different ways. Yes, if you come to the Las Vegas area or live in this area, createpeacefmi.com. So Create Peace Functional Movement Institute is in Henderson, Nevada, and I can work on you in person. And I have the physical location, and then I have a on-demand studio that, like I say, I do ball rolling mixed with functional movement and yoga as well. And I have over 250 on-demand videos, and I do some lives too on Zoom with that. And then I am putting, like I say, finally finishing up this course, which has been in the works for quite a long time, but it's going to be specifically online, on demand for restore your core and pelvic floor. And then I am going to put a program together. If people don't have a practitioner in their area or whatnot, again, I will do like a package of 3 online sessions with a person. If they don't have anybody that's close to them, I'm happy to do that. And I do, this one is near and dear to my heart because of course I've had all these surgeries and I've lived it. So I do, I specialize in low back, but also with the scar recovery, I call it, for the C-sections and hysterectomies.
So if they don't live in your area, is there like a master website that lists NKT practitioners that they
There
could go
is
to?
NKT directory if they want
There
to
we
see.
go.
Yeah, super easy to do. So that's an option as well.
And what do they look for in a practitioner? I know there's level 1, 2, and 3. What distinguishes them, and if it's a what should women look for if they're looking for a practitioner in NKT?
It depends what they have in mind as far as what they want to fix. Level 3 is going to be the most experienced, and we're able to work with a lot of dysfunctions. And with NKT, there's different practitioners, so a lot of different areas of practitioners can be certified in NKT. Me myself, I'm a massage therapist. There's chiropractors. There's a few doctors, personal trainers, also Pilates, yoga. So it depends kind of what modality. Any of us could do some of the work, but blending it maybe with chiropractic or maybe a massage therapist.
Okay.
Also, that's when I got my Pilates machine because I'm all about getting that core on. But if we expect them to go and fire up that TVA when it's not firing, it takes a little bit more time. So working with the scar and things like that, and then activating on the Pilates equipment is, in my opinion, a very good way. Sometimes I'll just give them breathing exercise too to start with, but
Well,
breathing
yeah,
is
I
the
think
most.
the breathing is one of the most simple things, but one of the most critical. And it's basically 90-90 breathing. You're laying on the floor, your feet are up at a 90-degree angle, and you're breathing into your
Yeah,
belly and slow out.
yeah, it's not hard. It's funny because it's so simple, but when I tell
Nobody does
people
it.
that, we don't prioritize it. We're like,
Yeah.
whatever, breathing, breathing. But when we start really realizing why, we go,
Yeah.
okay, we have to back it up. Even me, like I get busy and I'm like, oh, you haven't been optimizing your body. You better get to it. Breathing. So sometimes I'll work my scar, I'll do my breathing, I'll do some of my activations, and I'm better.
Yeah,
You know,
no, just certainly. So what I'm hoping to do is to have you on again, and talk about in depth a couple different things. The jaw thing in particular we mentioned, the hips, the feet, and just keep tackling these topics. So what I want to ask the audience to do also is that if you have questions or ideas or topics that you'd like to have discussed the next time we have Karina on, please leave it in the comments and we'll see what we can do. Because I have a fair amount of experience with this and I'm a mess. And so I have lots of questions all the time, but there are things I'm sure I haven't thought of. And so, yes, leave a comment there on the comment section and we'll get back to it. So a couple things before we finish. Check out the Old Ladies Lift website. It's oldladieslift.com. We have fantastic athlete bios, videos, and such of other older women doing absolutely amazing things. So if you think you're too old to lift, you're not. And if you think you're not strong enough, that's just not true. You can do this. Most of the women that I am aware of in my group started in their 40s, late 50s, sometimes even 60s and 70s. And so it's never too late to start lifting. So check out the website. If you are a woman over 40 who lifts, join our Facebook group. It's a private group. I think we have about 12,000 members now. No men allowed, although they try regularly to get in. Um, there, everybody talks about everything relative to being woman, older, and lifting. We post our videos, we encourage each other. It's become a real wonderful group of women and very encouraging. So consider joining the private Facebook group. It is also called Old Ladies Lift. And backing up just back to the website, if you're on the website and you want a cool t-shirt, check the t-shirts, sweatshirts, and everything else. Those support everything else that we do. And finally, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. That's real important so that you get notifications when we have updates and such. And Karina, I want to thank you for taking the time to be on this podcast and give us such great information. And for all you older women out there and lifting, just come and join us. It's a lot of fun. So thank you everybody for listening, and we'll talk to you again in a week or two.